of USA Gymnastics, as former team Dr. Larry Nassar is about to be sentenced for 10 counts of sexually abusing gymnasts under his care. Athletes have been giving testimony for 5 days, many saying they felt betrayed by officials running the sport. More than 100 other gymnasts have come forward to say Nassar sexually abused them. At the court in Michigan, the BBC's Resigned explained what USA Gymnastics has been saying about the resignations.
There is no mention of this ongoing case, but they say that this is just part of a change at the top. But of course, it is connected to what's going on and what's been going on in the courtroom at the end of the corridor from where I am standing. Now, I've been speaking to a lot of the young women who have been sharing their stories in the past week, and all of them, of course, want to make sure that Larry Nassar, the man they say sexually abused them when they were much younger, is given justice. They want to make sure that he spends life behind bars. But the other thing that they all want to make sure is that USA Gymnastics is held accountable, because they believe that there was, in many senses, a sense of enabling, a culture of enabling is the phrase that one woman used, where USA Gymnastics was given many complaints about Larry Nassar's behaviour. Now, he was the team doctor for the US Gymnastics team. He also treated a lot of state-level gymnasts here and around the country, and he used his medical treatment under the guise of medical treatment to abuse these young women. Now, the concern is that USA Gymnastics covered up what was going on and didn't address it. So in many ways, they would say that they are addressing this with the resignation of these 3 top board members, but many women here will say there needs to be a complete reorganisation of that. They believe that the culture runs deep in USA Gymnastics and hope that things can change for others, even though after 2 decades of working with them, Larry Nassar spent 2 decades working there. Of course, that means things won't necessarily change for them.
Virginia Vajanathan there, she has been covering the trial of Larry Nassar. But let's talk now to Dr. Callie Stewart, who is in Southampton. She's part of an international group seeking to address many of the issues in women's gymnastics. Good to see you, Doctor. Thanks for joining us. There has been international shock, really, over what we're witnessing inside the courtroom and these young athletes giving their testimony. Do you think gymnastics as a sport has a particular problem in terms of girls, their vulnerability, the fact that they feel fearful about speaking up, that things like this can be covered up for so long?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult, I imagine, for these gymnasts to speak out. What we know about gymnastics is that it's part of it's a highly controlled, highly regulated, highly disciplined environment, and these gymnasts kind of are socialised, as it were, to have little voice and very little autonomy, making it very difficult for them to speak up and claim their rights in those situations.
Is there also a problem for parents that they assume, and I'm not just talking about gymnastics here, that when they drop their children to a training session or they're involved in elite sport, that they are in a safe place, safe environment?
Yes, very much so. We assume that sport is a safe place, and unfortunately now we're seeing that cases of abuse are sort of coming out across all different kinds of sports. But I think the point is that the culture of sport, where it's around win at all costs, it encourages an environment where young athletes have very little voice and autonomy, and they're constantly striving for adult approval. So it's very difficult for us to monitor this.
And I wonder, Doctor, particularly in this case with Larry Nassar, if the code of silence, the fact that this went on for so long, became in a way normalised.
Yes, I think so. Many of these culturally embedded norms, values, beliefs, practices are so difficult to change, and it's this culture or this environment that the young gymnasts are part of that make it incredibly difficult for them to speak out, and in a sense for them to even recognise what abuse is. I mean, sexual abuse is a little bit more obvious perhaps, but other types of abuse, such as physical abuse, emotional abuse, that are so normalised as part of that culture, are actually very difficult to identify, and therefore difficult for them to understand that they have rights.
So what can be done then to not only educate these young athletes but to empower them as well?
Yeah, I think education and empowerment is the way forward, that we need to focus our efforts on the young athletes to be able to claim their rights in these situations, to open up conversations about healthy relationships, gender education, and also I don't think we make the most of their digital literacy abilities. For example, using mobile devices and apps that enable them to report more easily, but also to self-assess themselves in these situations and assess their environment as risky.
Yeah, lots of work still to be done. Dr. Callie Stewart, thank you very much for joining us with your insights there. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come, there's been good news at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Business leaders hear that the prospects for the global economy are the brightest in almost a decade.